Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be giving my first impressions on the Razer Viper version 3 Pro. Now this is mainly going to be a comparison between my old main, the Death Adder version 3 Pro, which I mained for like about a year, and obviously the new mouse that I have, the one that I'm going to be talking about mainly today, the Razer Viper version 3 Pro. And there's mainly going to be a comparison between those, but I'll also talk about why I even switched from the Death Adder to the Viper in the first place. Because a lot of people are probably wondering that, because why did you switch from a top-tier Razer mouse to another top-tier Razer mouse that costs a fuck ton of money? And that's mainly to do with the shape. I just simply prefer symmetrical shapes. They just feel more consistent in my palm. It doesn't feel like I'm being locked in place. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but let me explain. On the Death Adder, I felt like it was just too big for me. I have I would say medium-sized hands, but even then, but even with my hand size, it felt like this specific part of my palm, like this specific part where I'm pointing with my pointer finger, like the part between my thumb and my pointer finger, that part of my palm is like the main part that makes contact, and basically very little of the rest of my palm makes actual contact with the mouse. It's mainly this part of my palm. As you can see right here, this is how I primarily grip the mouse. And when I'm fully, have my full palm on the mouse, as I usually do when I claw grip, it just feels kind of awkward. It just doesn't really feel right. I mean, it feels okay, hence the reason why I kept it for a fucking year. It doesn't feel unusable. If it would, I would have returned it. But, it still just feels pretty decently uncomfortable, and why I just generally prefer symmetrical mice. And another thing is the big issue that has developed over a lot of Razer mice in the past, and including this, unfortunately, which is the random, notorious actuating scroll wheel. And it's not as bad as it'll just happen every single time I scroll down, but it just happens randomly to the point where it just is just pretty infuriating. Hence why I got the Viper version 3 Pro, because this is a symmetrical shape that is pretty similar to the Death Adder, but just more symmetrical. And in fact, it's pretty similar to the G Pro X in terms of shape, but I really do like that. I prefer a higher hump, and even though it is a mid hump, I feel like it fills out my palm enough. As you can see, it looks, I know it's kind of hard to show, but more of my palm does make contact with the actual mouse. It's not just the left side of my palm primarily. It's mainly my whole palm that makes contact with the mouse, which I just appreciate a lot more, and I just really, really like. Another thing that I like is the scroll wheel tensioning. I also preferred this on the Viper version 2 Pro as well, but I feel like the scroll wheel tensioning is just better overall. I do feel that, at least on my copy, the Death Adder had a more consistent scroll wheel, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like the notch was kind of getting stuck on a few steps like it kind of does here, although it's not as bad as it was on my Viper version 2 copy, where that felt a little bit more inconsistent. Here, it feels a bit more consistent, but again, just not as consistent as my Death Adder, because this, no matter how much I scroll, even though I, again, don't really like the tensioning on this, and it is too loose for me, it feels very consistent. It doesn't feel like the notches are getting stuck, so hey, at least there's that going for the scroll wheel. But another thing I do vastly prefer on the Death Adder, which is kind of a bummer, at least on my copy of the Viper, maybe they'll improve it on later batches, but the side buttons, honestly, on my copy, are very similar to the G Pro X in terms of overall feel, and that's not in a good way. Maybe slightly better, but honestly, that wouldn't even I would not care that much, honestly. But the main problem is the rebound of the side buttons, funnily enough. On the Death Adder, these feel great, even though they have a kind of weird kind of rebound sound. That's not that big of a deal. I don't actually really feel that. These feel very, very good, very snappy, very, very good. Now, let's compare that to the Viper version 3 Pro on my copy. As you can hear, they just sound more mushy, and they feel like that as well. And again, they just feel pretty similar to the G Pro X Superlight 2 side buttons. And again, not in a good way. These just are pretty mushy and don't feel nearly as tactile as the Death Adder. But again, the main problem is the rebound, which is going to be kind of hard to hear. But let me just try to accentuate this. You can kind of hear that like weird, like kind of rebound sound where kind of it kind of feels like the rebound is kind of getting slightly stuck. I don't know how to really explain it that well, but again, it just doesn't feel as smooth and as like tactile as it does on the on the Death Adder version 3 Pro. I'm getting these names mixed up because they're both V3 Pros of something. So yeah, but again, honestly, I think the trade-offs are worth it. And like just transitioning over from this to this, I'm going to be keeping this mouse. And I know that for a fact because I return a bunch of mice because they double click. This doesn't. I've already tested it out. Same as with the Death Adder version 3 Pro, hence another reason why I kept it for so long, because Razer mice just don't double click. That's the main reason why I've stuck with Razer. I would try out a lot of other mice brands if they just didn't double click, but the main problem is that a lot of them do. Even with optical switches, I tested that if I click from the front, a lot of the time it will still double click, and that is really, really not something I want, because when playing games like Geometry Dash, it is important as all hell that you don't double click, because it will just immediately die if you just make an accidental click in that game. But yeah, and also just overall other things. Skates feel pretty good compared to my worn down skates on my Death Adder. These sound a little bit louder, but that makes sense because again, new mouse, old mouse, so it kind of makes sense why these sound a little bit louder. But overall QC is also phenomenal. No creaking, no flexing, no grinding, no click problems whatsoever, even though again they are like a tiny bit mushier than the Death Adder. They still are very consistent. I will say that the switches do feel more consistent than the Death Adder in terms of feel. The Death Adder on my copy, it felt like the right click was a lot more tactile than the left. You can kind of hear it maybe, but you just might be able to tell that the right click just sounds sharper. I don't know if that, again, I'm going to stop even pointing it out. But yeah, these feel a tad bit more mushy, but still, again, they feel pretty consistent, which is really, really nice, because I have had a ton of mice in the past, especially with subpar optical switches that have just not been consistent in terms of click feel, and it felt fucking cheap as hell, just really bad. Here, that's not the case whatsoever, and I'm really, really glad to say that. And again, QC feels great. No flexing, no creaking whatsoever. Even when I put a fuck ton of pressure, I'm putting a lot of pressure on the sides right now, and the places where it would most likely like creak or flex, nothing whatsoever. It's built rock solid. Another thing, the weight feels decently lighter than the Death Adder. The Death Adder was already decently light, but I feel like this is a nice sweet spot between like around 40 to 60 grams. Because I honestly feel like 54 grams is a very nice sweet spot for like lightweight mice. Because it's not like too light to the point where it feels like you're carrying nothing, but it's not too heavy to the point where it feels like, it would feel better if, you got a lighter mouse. So I feel like this is, again, a nice sweet spot. And I really do like the weight on this. It feels very, very light. Not as light as like my Ninjutsu Sora, because that is like 40 grams, somewhere around there. But this still feels very, very light. So, yeah, that's just my overall impressions on the Viper version 3 Pro. I'll give more details on the overall performance. And this also is my first time having a hyper-pulling dongle, because I haven't had it before on my old Death Adder. So, yeah. Oh, and also, one more thing before I go. Another huge reason why I got this over the Death Adder, this coating is not a fingerprint, but a dirt magnet is what I want to say. I mean, maybe it's better on the smooth touch variants, but yeah, this it shows a lot of grime, and I'm really glad that they've kind of done away with this white kind of coating, because while the overall feel, honestly, I don't really mind that much. just the look of it just looks gross. It just, every time I pick it up, there's just like some grime that I just immediately notice. Meanwhile on this, the most you can see after like a little bit of use is like some slight fingerprints that just go away over time. So yeah, that's basically it. I don't have all else to say. Again, I'll talk more about the performance in my actual review. I really have not tested out the performance yet, but I'm sure it'll be stellar because Razer performance is basically flawless except for some like dongle disconnects that I've heard a lot of people talking about. So hopefully that doesn't happen on my copy, but yeah, if that doesn't happen, it's basically guaranteed to be flawless. But again, I have heard that that has happened, so do be wary about that. But I would think that they would iron out these issues by now, so just still be a little bit cautious when getting Razer mice, especially recently, because a lot of people have reported their dongle randomly disconnecting. So yeah, but that never happened on my old Death Header even once. So there you go. But yeah, that's basically it, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.